welcome to the Covered Alive Marketing Show. This is episode 82, and in today's show, I'm joined by Pascal Fintoni, talking about how to use Filmmaker storytelling techniques to captivate your audience. As ever, if you want to subscribe, if you want to be notified of future episodes of the show, if you don't want to miss them, all you need to do is go to confident.live/subscribe, confident.live/subscribe. And if you're watching the replay, it's awesome that you're here. Just put hashtag replay in the comments. But it's time to get Pascal on. How are you doing, Pascal? How are things up
hello.
north?
Thank you so much for having me today, Ian.
Oh, it's a pleasure. We've been trying to organize this for a long time, and this is kind of like if you bring marketers into the same room and try and get them organized. Sometimes it doesn't always go according to plan, but I like to say we've been very busy.
We have, and you're right. It feels almost like this miracle where, when Doctor Strange had to come up with one option for people to be able to, conquer, Thanos. We tried for the better part of a year and a half to have our diaries to match, and here we are today, the 6th of October. So
has it really been that long? Oh my goodness, that's great. But it is great. You've looked it up, haven't you? Yeah, it's great that you brought in a little movie, a little film thing there. So yes, you're massively into films, as I am too, and so that's
yes.
I don't watch as many movies as I would like though. So I don't know. This might be something to do with having kids. Although
yes, it is.
Yeah, maybe that's my excuse. Although we have watched the whole of the Marvel movies, the Avenger movies in one go. So there we go. So where are you dialing in from today?
So from Durham, or near enough, near Durham. I live in a small town called Walsingham. It's a charming, village in Weardale. And as I'm looking out the window, all I see are green hills, rivers, and lovely trees. Oh. Although with the autumn approaching, the leaves are turning into that kind of, very, very multicolored kind of tapestry. And I've been stuck in this chair now since March, like everybody else.
You've not moved at all. You're just stuck there, and it's nothing to do with super glue. You didn't unfortunately super glue your backside to the chair. No, but we're not going to talk about anything to do with lockdown or the C word or anything like that on today's show. It's a really positive show because we're going to be talking about how to share or how to kind of it's all to do with filmmaker storytelling techniques. And on this show, I haven't really talked much about storytelling, and really, so and that's because it's not so much my. Well, I've always felt that it's not really my thing, my area of expertise, and I probably know a lot more about it than I think I do. Would you say that more people? I mean, do you think everyone can tell a story?
Oh, I do, but in my kind of experience is people are too nervous to tell the story. Because when you commit to a story, when you kind of lay it out there, no matter whether you are retelling someone else's story, which we'll talk about, or telling your own, you essentially are very exposed to criticism, to kind of indifference and so on and so forth. And therefore, very often people tend to do is stick to what we call data as opposed to drama. And drama is where really we are at our most vulnerable. But I would agree that anybody is able to tell the visual story in the case of live streaming, which I know is your area of expertise. But when you talk about, you're not sure, you're nervous and so on, I've been nervous for quite some time about sharing what I understood about visual storytelling and filmmaking, because I felt in a world of content marketing and in the world of sales and marketing, it just wasn't plausible, or it wasn't just it wasn't legitimate as a claim that one could learn. But actually what happened here, well, people like you, Chris, Richard, Roger, and many others out there kind of convinced me that it was actually plausible to say to somebody, if you want to engage an audience, might you learn something from those who've been engaging audiences for centuries as opposed to 30 years, which is essentially how old the internet is. So I was very nervous, but took a bit of a leap of faith and presented I did something very, very small called Video Killed the Social Media Star at an event in Newcastle some years ago. It was like literally an hour's presentation. And honestly, I was sweating buckets thinking, they're going to listen to me and they're going to go, you what? you want us to take something from the world of entertainment into the world of business, and somehow it's going to work. And the reaction has been so positive that it grew from an hour to half a day to 2 days workshop, and so on and so forth. And really, I was able to do a presentation that brought all those key elements at the Upreneur Summit, as you may recall, last year.
Yeah.
And now I feel a lot more confident to say to people that at the heart of my coaching and the heart of my kind of skill development, I bring the filmmakers technique and toolkit. Wow. And I'm just much happier. But it's taken me years.
Well, you're on the right show. This is the Confident Live Marketing Show. We're all about confidence here. Even if you don't start with that confidence, we can get people there. Thank you for that. So I don't want you to share any more stuff because we haven't actually started the podcast recording. But I can also see we've got some fabulous people watching. I can see Bob Gentle is here. Mark Asquith is here. Fabulous people watching. So thank you so much, guys. I will. So do keep those questions, comments coming. Let us know where in the world you're watching from. This is a live show as well as a podcast. And as I said to before, if you want to be notified for future episodes, all you need to do is go to confident.live/subscribe. It even rhymes. I mean, how awesome is that? That's the way we roll on this show. But yeah, it's time to get on with the main show. So we'll be with you just after this.
This is the Confident Live Marketing Podcast. Confident Live Marketing Podcast with Ian Anderson Gray, helping entrepreneurs level up their impact, authority and profits through the power of live video. Gain confidence in front of the camera, confidence with technology, and confidence with the content and marketing.
Together, we can go live!
Hello, this is the Confident Live Marketing Show. This is episode 82. As always, we're broadcasting to Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Periscope, Twitch, and so much more. And of course, this is a podcast. More information at iag.me/podcast. Today, I'm joined by my good friend, Pascal Fintoni. I can't wait for this. This has taken so long for us to actually get together. And in today's show, I'm going to be talking, or Pascal's going to be talking about how to use Filmmaker storytelling techniques to captivate your audience. I really can't wait about that. And so really, are you worried that your live videos are kind of, well, I hate to say this, boring? Are you concerned that your audience is getting distracted and switching off? What if you could learn from filmmakers and documentary makers and tell stories that will actually captivate your audience? Well, in this episode, I am joined by the fabulously talented guy, Pascal Fintoni. But first, it's important to mention my first sponsor, and also to say the show notes for this episode when the podcast is out will be found at iag.me/82. So today's show is sponsored, as ever, by my friends at Content 10x. Do you want to find more ways to create more content? Well, you won't after you meet the team at Content 10x. They are awesome. They are a specialist content repurposing agency. They will take one live stream or a blog post or a podcast or a pre-recorded video and explode it into a plethora of new platform-specific on-brand content. Now, if you don't want them to do it for you, then they can teach you how to do it. They have a blog, they have a podcast, they have a book, they have a toolkit. Definitely worth checking all of that out. And they've got a new service called LinkedIn 10x. As I said before, Amy was on the show quite a few weeks ago, and she mentioned a lot more about the LinkedIn 10x service. And this is really how you can level things up, create more impact on LinkedIn. All you need to do is create one piece of video content, and they will make them into, as Amy says, video babies and lots of other things on LinkedIn to really level things up there. So definitely check them out. They're really smart, responsive, creative, and effective. All you need to do is go to content10x.com for more information. Okay, it's time to bring in my guest today, my very special guest, who is none other than Pascal Fintoni, who is a professional trainer and speaker with over 25 years practical experience in digital marketing. Pascal has worked across diverse industry sectors, developing and implementing audience engagement campaigns. He's also a video producer, and he has introduced many of the storytelling techniques used by filmmakers into his coaching to help his clients create great online reputations. Pascal, welcome to the show!
Well, what an introduction. Thank you so much, Ian, and thank you to our viewers live and on replay. As ever, your support is really appreciated.
Well, definitely appreciate that. And the live viewers have been very, very patient. So I think it is time to bring some of those in. We've got, so unfortunately, Pascal, you won't be able to see these, but I will read these out. So the wonderful Bob Gentle is here, who says, OMG, Pascal is my favourite. Awesome. Mark Asquith is saying, my two lovelies. It's very kind of you, Mark. And Bob was saying, so we were talking just before we got started about movies and films, and Pascal is a bit of a film buff, to put it mildly. So Bob says, I watch too many movies. Is there such a thing as too many movies, Pascal?
No, it's not possible.
It's not possible. So there you go. You're okay. You're okay. I've got a good question from Latasha, which I'll bring in a minute. So thank you about that. We've got Ben Amos watching from Down Under. What time is it in Australia at the moment? It's probably sometime in the evening anyway. We've got Sasha Lydiard watching from Oxford in the UK. And Martin is up very early in the morning watching from Toronto. Thank you, Martin, for joining us. Really appreciate it. I hope you're doing really, really well. And there's no pressure from Sasha. Not heard Pascal speak before, but heard good things. So
thank you.
I hope you're not feeling too nervous, Pascal. But so you're dialing in from Durham, and you were just describing it before we got started. You know, for podcast listeners, just look out your window. Or tell us what you see out.
Look at my window again. So what do I see? I see green hills. I see sheep, rivers, and trees, and then of course the roofs of some of the houses and clouds approaching as well. The sunlight was very short-lived this morning.
Oh well, there we go. So Durham is a very lovely place. It has a special place in my heart because it's where I went to university. It's also where I proposed to my wife in Durham. So it's a very picturesque place.
Whereabouts in Durham? Were you near the cathedral or the castle?
Yes, it was kind of like where probably a lot of proposals have happened. It was on Prebends Bridge, which is the very picturesque bridge. Yeah. So there we go. I'm just need to be a bit more original, but there we go. It was a very beautiful place. So. So yeah, do keep the questions. Today we're going to be talking about storytelling techniques, particularly from the world of film and documentaries. We met back in, I want to say it was 2015. Were you were at the New Media Europe conference in Manchester, weren't you? Have I got that right?
I was. I believe this is where we all met in some ways. I mean, I actually was there with my friend Chris Ducker, who was making a trip from the Philippines just for that event, and we've not seen each other for years. And it was just such an event. But I met you, I met Mark, I met Richard Tubb, Roger Edwards, Bob was there, if I'm not mistaken, and Amy. I mean, it was just such a wonderful gathering, and to this day, we must actually thank the organizers, because beyond the event, I think they created a movement around content marketing done right.
They did, and Isabella was on the show it was either last week or the week before. I can't remember exactly. My brain has gone to mush. But we've had Mike and Isabella on the show who are music radio creative, but they founded New Media Europe. I mean, unfortunately, it hasn't. There were only 2 conferences, but those 2 conferences were pivotal in bringing so many of us together. And I don't think they kind of, even today, realize how much they made an impact in this world, bringing so many of us together. So that's awesome. So how did you get into video? And does that kind of relate to your love of film? I mean, presumably you've loved film for the majority of your life.
Yeah, so film for me started as an escape, and I think it's important that I tell the story fully, because actually it has some kind of relation to the advice I'm going to give. But when I was 6 years old, I had cancer, and I was in and out of hospital for a year and a half. And at the time, actually, I was already having to isolate for all sort of reasons. So the only kind of companion I had beyond my parents' visits was this TV in my room, a hospital room. And the nurses there were very kind. They would allow me to watch all movies all night long. There was just nothing else to do, and I had to protect myself from essentially getting infections and so on. So to be honest with you, I think the trigger point was spending so much time watching movies very late. So I watched the first Bruce Lee movies then, but also action movies and TV series and so on. And they became kind of my companions for the day. And then I started to make up stories. So then I would write stories in my book of those characters I'd seen. So I would invent, follow-up stories and the likes. And then I kind of carried on this passion for stories. And as a teenager, I would go to the cinema. I would buy magazines and so on and so forth. But it really didn't become something that I considered to be part of my professional toolkit and skill set until, as a marketing officer, I was given the job to make marketing videos. Now, back then it was VHS cassettes. So if you can imagine, here I was, a very young marketing officer. There was a video production team. My job actually was working at the time in the travel industry. So we went overseas to film different resorts and to film different kind of amenities to make a marketing video. And by the second day, I just felt that what was being recorded and what was being essentially pulled together was just very boring because it was just factual. There was no thread, there was no stories, there was no kind of main characters to lead you into it. And I kind of rang my boss, from where we were, and I said, listen, we are 2 days into a 5-day shoot, but I don't think it's going well. But I just felt I was too young and too junior to have the audacity to tell others what to do. And he said, well, what do you mean? I just explained what I thought was missing in terms of making it truly engaging. And he said, fine, I agree with you. Now you go and tell them. You can imagine, here I was, I think I was barely 22, 23. And I was telling people twice my age, I think you're doing this wrong. and kind of carried on with the project. Now, credit to them, they took some of the notes, as we say in the industry, rather well, and created, I think, a documentary as opposed to a promo video, and that worked very well. The era, however, I got a bit carried away, so then I was given the project to run. I remember to this day, Ian, when I was asked, how many copies of the VHS cassettes, because yes, it was that long ago, so some of our younger audience will not know what VHS cassettes are, but so when I was asking how many copies, we didn't know, so we looked at our database of customers and ordered a copy for each of those customers, which I think was in the thousands. Now, I don't know if you can imagine how much space you would need to store thousands of VHS cassettes. So I was the most hated marketing officer in the office because there was just boxes everywhere. There were boxes in the corridors, there was boxes under the desk, there was boxes in the loo, in the canteen, and so on. And it took us forever to dispatch them. And I learned a very important lesson then, which is actually when it comes to video content, the creation bit is going to be all right. You're going to work your way around it. Distribution is far more important, which is actually, as a result of which I've become quite a fan and a keen observer of live streaming as you're doing. I'm about to embark in my own kind of journey of discovery. But I think what I love about live video is that distribution to a point is taken care of. Of course, you can do more things about it. And then I worked my way through essentially the different formats from VHS cassette to CD-ROMs, I think they were, then DVDs, then online, but always bringing this idea of, how do we make this interesting and what is the story, what is the hook, who are the characters that are going to guide us through, the narrative. And then it was 2005, I'm going to say, Ian, where I got a letter from the tax man. And I thought to myself, oh, that can't be good. And actually, it was very good. Surprisingly, I had been paying too much tax, and they sent me a check to pay me some of that tax,
wow.
Ian, which was quite unusual. So here I was with a check. It was quite a sizable amount. I think there was some mistakes because of my nationality and the way in which I've been paying and the NI number. And I remember looking at the check thinking, well, I've got two options. I can spend the money to build the extension to the house, as my wife had been requesting for some time, or I can go ahead and buy filmmaking kits. So to this day, my wife is still waiting for the extension to the house. And then I rang some friends that I knew, and I said, I've got this crazy idea. I want to know what it takes to make a feature film. And I want to go to Los Angeles and I want to pitch the film. I want to do the full from script to screen journey as my school, because I had this itch, essentially, Ian, after consuming, oh goodness, years and years and years of film and TV series and documentaries. I wanted to know what it felt like to make a feature film. In fact, we made two over periods of years. I had the pleasure, immense privilege of going to Los Angeles to the American film market. I did the pitching, the selling, and so on and so forth. Came back with more information and knowledge about what it takes to be a good storyteller. And then within a year, I did this presentation called Video Killed the Social Media Star, because by then we knew about the algorithm and we knew about live coming on board. And I felt that the risk was for my customer who had worked so hard to build a following on social media, they were about to lose out because video was becoming the premium form of content, and it grew from there. But again, as I mentioned to you during our mini conversation before today, I was never comfortable with this idea of bringing filmmaking and marketing or filmmaking and business development. I just didn't think it was plausible. But with encouragement from you and Bob and Mark and many others out there, I kind of gave it a go, and the reception has been so great that I'm now a lot more comfortable, although I still have small trepidations every so often, to share what I think we understand about how to engage an audience and how to discover actually your voice as a storyteller.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for your honesty, because I think often it seems almost like everyone else can know what we should be doing and what our expertise is, and we're sometimes the last person to actually just get on and do it, because sometimes we can be scared and we're worried about how this is going to go down. But I'm so glad that you took that encouragement and you went with this. And it's also magical to know that your love of film and filmmaking is merging together with this, and you're doing something that you absolutely love doing, which I mean, let's face it, I mean, you can't have a better job than that. So there we go. That's awesome. I can see. So Ben Amos was just saying, 'cause he's watching from Australia. It was 8:45 p.m. and Royden is watching from Limerick and Ireland. Welcome to the show. Hope you're doing really well. And Tim Sorn is watching from the US, up early as usual. Very impressed, Tim. Hope you're doing well. So if you've got any questions for Pascal anything to do with filmmaking, with how we can learn from that world, and particularly storytelling. This is something that I really want to pick Pascal's brain about. And actually, we had a question before, so I don't know whether you're still here, Latasha. This is a great question. I wanted to bring in this a little bit later, so because I wanted to hear about Pascal's story. And this is a great question. How long online? How long should you take to tell a story? And I think that's a really interesting question, because I think it probably will depend on the format. But with live video, sometimes we're worried about the number of people watching us live and all that kind of stuff. Should we get obsessed by that? How long should we take to tell a story?
Well, actually, if you think about film, typically they last between 90 minutes to 2 hours, and some of them get a bit longer. But actually, what you should be always ready to do is tell the story in as short a time as possible, because things could get in the way. So when we prepare for film production, we essentially go have plan Bs and Cs and Ds, because something could get in the way. The weather could turn on you, technology could work against you, and so on. So what you need to be able to do is you have a vision about the story in a full version. But within that, there are many things you can take out just in case you have to. But I would say that a story, or even the beginning of a story, where you can kind of set what we call the setup, where we understand where this is going, should be able to be explained within 3 minutes. And then after that, you expand upon it. But, if you think about how an audience can be engaged by a movie for more than 2 hours and never actually lose concentration, it's quite something. And the reason why it's happening is because the little story elements kind of build on each other. And it's almost like an analogy that I use is when we were kids, and we got caught out because we ate all the chocolate. And then our parents said to us, explain to me why the chocolate tin is empty. And we can come up with the most incredible story that goes on forever. And we use the magic word, and then. And then the aircraft kind of crash landed in a neighbor's garden, and I got distracted. And then the dog did this, and then the tin fell on the floor, and then the dog ate all the chocolate. And then you kind of carry on to end the story as long as it takes for you to get out of trouble.
And that actually happened, didn't it? All of that.
Absolutely. So in terms of duration of the live shows, it's more to do about how you've been able to segment it so that you can actually make it very elastic depending on what's happening. Because you guys, I mean you, because I'm not the live streamer just yet, you know, you do the hardest thing, which is that so many things can happen during live, and I can't wait to hear more about it in a moment from you, Ian. But the same can be true of the day of shooting. So, you know, normally we have our shooting list and our script and storyboard and so on. But on the day, we must be ready to do less than planned and yet still tell the story.
I think that is really good advice, and something that I don't feel I always do a very good job of is making it. I think brevity is really important. Sometimes we can gibber on, and particularly with a live show, because we're not editing it, sometimes we can go off on tangents. Sometimes those tangents are great. Sometimes we can waffle on, but having a strict run of show, I think, is important, and being really to the point. You know, you got to know why you're doing the show as well, and all that kind of stuff. So that was a great question. Thank you very much, Latasha. That's a really awesome question. One that I get asked a lot is how long should a live show be? But I think specifically when it comes to storytelling, I think that's really interesting. So you already kind of said this, that you've not done much in the way of live video before. You know, just tell us your views on live video and what you're planning to do. What are your thoughts?
Well, actually, what was interesting is, so as part of my coaching, I thought live video was almost, you know, your black belt in kind of visual storytelling. So you had to pay your dues by doing other form of visual storytelling, and live was the kind of graduation moment where you go, well, you're so good at mastering the other forms that you can now do live. But I've gone full circle, Ian, and I now ask people to go live first. And the reason for that is that it takes away so many other kind of considerations, such as the editing, as you mentioned, distribution is taken care of, but also they end up doing what I call the one-shot wonders, or the one kind of recording wonders, and not worry so much about it. And actually, by becoming a good or confident live streamer, you then can bring that into the other form of video. But for my part, I'm curious about live. I'm generally very curious about live and how we're going to bring filmmaking and documentary making into it. So I'm going to do a non-work related project, and the reason for that, and I think it's advice for all of your listeners and viewers out there, which is that there will be things that you'll do as part of live, which is in line with building your brand and building your business. But the risk is that it's so narrow or so specific that you're not allowed to explore other ways of telling a story, and as a result to which you might not increase your skill set and understanding. And the reason for that is that imagination is the number one talent that one has to nurture. If you think about the books you've read, if you think about the TV series you've enjoyed, the plays you've watched, the musicals and opera, you know, that you've been to, the storytellers, those who crafted, you know, this experience, whether it's visual only or audio as well, they use their imagination to come up with it. You know, from Agatha Christie coming up with the stories for Hercule Poirot, all the way to Jon Favreau and coming up with the stories for The Mandalorian, they had to use imagination. But the imagination comes from doing things that sometimes there's not a direct link with, you know, who you are and what you want to do. And really, your role is to adopt the behavior of an independent filmmaker. Why? Because time is always against you. You don't have as much resources as you wish. You don't have the budget you wish. I'm sure, Ian, there's bits of kit you wish you could afford that you can't right now. So as an indie live producer, you know, you have to adopt the behavior, and some of that behavior is to experiment and do maybe some short form, a bit of content that can bring it, because you really have to expand and extend your talent as much as possible, but create projects and environments that are going to really invite your imagination to be challenged and to do something that is sometimes just for the fun of it. If I think about my hero, Steven Spielberg, some of his attempt when he was a young man was really for the fun of it, to experiment. And without that, I don't think he'll be where he is today. So where I am with live streaming is I'm going to be launching a show called the Films with Friends Experiment. And essentially, it's going to be my dream of hosting a show about films, reviewing films, talking about films from the past, recent release, doing some critique of trailers, talking about books, and inviting with some people that are fans, not just filmmakers. But within that, I'm going to really push harder in the production value. and actually talk about experiment with things I want to recommend people try out for themselves as part of visual storytelling, because I'm just curious. And I think that's also one of the qualities of the independent video producer or film producer or live producer. You are curious and you nurture your imagination.
Really, really great stuff there. And I think having that excitement, that curiousness, the playing around with things, live video is the place to do it. I mean, things could go wrong, and they do go wrong. They still go wrong with me on a frequent basis. But I think it's playing around with those things. So let's talk about storytelling and how we can learn from filmmakers. But first of all, how can you explain what you mean by storytelling? Specifically,
I'm so glad you asked this question.
Yeah, when you're approaching it from a filmmaker point of view.
Yeah, because it's been used a lot for all the right reasons. But actually, when I look, read, and listen to the advice given by others about storytelling, it feels a bit like making a statement about, well, if you want to go across there, you have to swim. And then that's the end of it. And again, well, how do I learn to swim and what swimming techniques do I use? So I think storytelling has been used as a term in and around the content marketing, sounds a marketing world, but it's not been explained so well. So yes, I'm going to give you the filmmaker's perspective because I think it's interesting. So what we try and do, we try and essentially be an observer and a narrator of what is happening to others that the audience can relate to. So very often a filmmaker will not typically tell the story about what's happened to them, because actually sometimes we can't take the distance to tell the story well and fully. So the idea being that you're in a position to retell what has happened to others. And the number one story that has engaged all of us forever, from the moment we can sing songs to each other and read poems around the campfire, all the way to the recent efforts online and on big screen, the one story that we want to try and tell to others is as follows: how are people that I can relate to coping with a sudden change to their world? So it's a long kind of statement, but how are people that I can relate to coping with a sudden change to their world? And that sentence should be written on the whiteboard or on the post-it note against your screen. And your job, therefore, is to be the retailer of stories that have happened to others. And others are essentially those that the audience can relate to, which is why it's so hard sometimes as experts to move away from what I call data and not give the drama, because we will be kind of caught up in this idea of sharing what we know as opposed to what we've seen. And that's kind of the difference. And how you explore this question is by using 7 story elements. And that number is actually been tried and tested forever, well before I even understood why I was enjoying watching Bruce Lee on the small black and white TV when I was a young lad. So the first kind of question you need to ask yourself to tell the story is, why is their world changing? And you're going to be using that number one story element of a rider rides into town, a stranger, should I say, a stranger rides into town. And that stranger certainly creates that kind of ripple effect and changes the status quo. So that stranger who's riding into town could be, of course, an individual, could be a group of individuals, could be new technology, could be weather conditions changing, and so on and so forth. And is just creating enough ripple effect for the others that I can relate to are certainly caught into this change. And I'm observing how they feel about the change, how they react to the change, and all the emotion as well as the physical changes that they're going through. Now, that stranger who's riding into town could be actually a good influence. So they could be riding into town for good. But the idea being that there was something that the world of the others you can relate to was kind of going, the day-to-day was kind of happening. Sometimes there was a situation that was bad for them or good for them. And then suddenly it changes. And when you think about all the stories that you enjoy, all the movies that you're all enjoying, your hero was kind of happy to get on with whatever was happening in their lives. And then a stranger rides into town, from, Luke Skywalker all the way to, the recent book that you've read. So that's the number one, you've got to find your stranger, that is creating that, disrupting the status quo. then the next question you need to ask yourself is, so how is my hero or heroes dealing with that change? How are they trying to adapt? And you're going to be using 3 different story elements. You can use all of them or just do one. So firstly, you're going to be asking yourself, the idea of, are they essentially trying to go on a quest and using the quest element, which has been used a lot? Do they need to go from A to B and in the process learn how to cope with the change? And maybe there'll be obstacles along the way, or sometimes they don't change, but they have to change the environment around them. There's the idea of finding a destination or an object that can help them, do better. The quest element is very popular, but are you going to be using maybe the assemble element, something that is very popular? You have to put together a team with different talents, different skill set, but also with the highs and lows and the friction that comes to bring a team of desperate individuals together. And I use the term assemble on purpose, Ian. And then the final element that is available to you is probably the one that you use in your line of work, which is metamorphosis. Do they need to change so radically that they'll be transformed by what they go through to cope with that change? So a stranger rides into town, disrupts the status quo. Your heroes need to adapt. Are they going to go for a quest? Are they going to go for the assemble? Are they going to go for the metamorphosis? But that's not enough. That's not the story, because ultimately what you're going to do is share facts. You need to answer the third and by far the most important question to make this a story. Why is it so difficult? That's the story. Why is it so difficult? And you have 3 elements that you can use. Is it a race against time? So if you think of one of my all-time favorites, Back to the Future, the story of Marty McFly would be very short, actually, and very boring if all he had to do was to just wait and hide in a barn, and Doc Brown would eventually come up with whatever. But because they had to get the time right with the storm and the flash of light and so on, they had to get it right. So that makes the story. You could also use, is it impossible at first value? Is it what we call the David versus Goliath element, where frankly what your hero is up against seems quite impossible, and they're going to have to try maybe more than once and use different things, and maybe there's a fear element. The third and final element, in terms of what makes it so difficult, is probably by far my favorite, is what we call the 2 voices story element. That is to say that your hero is torn between 2 conflicting and 2 very different bits of advice or different course of action. So you have on one hand the person that knows a version of what needs to be done, which is usually a bit rushed, a bit dangerous, a bit risky, but kind of is part of what they like. We call that the trickster. And then the other, which is the person who knows what needs to be done, but sometimes their recommendation takes more effort and takes longer, and perhaps more there's more failure allowed to that. We call that the mentor. And if I used the Luke Skywalker example, he's torn between listening, of course, to Han Solo or to Obi-Wan Kenobi, who's going to be the one he listens to. Who is he going to follow in his journey as, essentially a hero? So this is how we split the story. And we use post-it notes, Ian. We use whiteboards. We scribble down. But until such time we've kind of used those 7 elements, we don't think we have a story, and therefore we won't be confident to go ahead with actually filming anything whatsoever.
Wow. There's so much in that. I mean, we could dig really deep into all of those different elements. And my mind is already buzzing. I suppose my kind of question, my follow-up questions to those things would be, well, number one, should all those elements, that storytelling, be in all our content? So, for example, in our podcast and our live video, what would you say about that?
So for me, you would use that to give you actually the segments you need. So back to the earlier question about how long should it be, I would use that if you're going to ask someone to give advice to your audience. So if you had a guest, for example, Ian, the way you would formulate the question would be actually informed by those elements, which essentially, well, why, is it happening, and why are you giving this advice? That would be the stranger riding into town. So what's the option here? And they may say, well, actually, what you have to do is pull a team together. Let's assemble. But then you would say to them, well, what makes it difficult to pull a team together? Or what makes the project difficult? And they may say, well, actually, it's quite a task, and time is against them. So you would kind of tease out essentially stories that people can relate to. Because the reason why we enjoy watching films, reading books, and watching plays and listening to the opera is because the people that we're observing are finding it tough. The journey is difficult. If it was easy, that wouldn't work. So also what you would do as a host, Ian, is ask your guests not to tell what they would do. They are the Obi-Wan Kenobi. Who cares? They need to tell the story from Luke, who's struggling. Need to tell the story from how the Goonies are struggling, to find the solution to what they're up against and so on. So that's number one. And then number two, I would use that as a reminder that when you want to give an example, you have to give a full example. So you have to share drama, not just data. So give an example when you say, so I remember of this company, and this is what they did, and this is what they got. That's not a story. Using the elements, you're going to start to flesh it out about, well, this is the options they had, and this is how they were torn by the options. And they went for that one, and it was hard. And the reason it was hard is because of this, and so on and so forth. And actually looking back now, they wish they did it differently. That's a story.
That's really helpful. I think because that's the kind of question I hear a lot is, storytelling is great, but how do I translate the story like of a film into my business? And this is something that I think back to my school days, and I loved writing creative stories. Sometimes they were really mad. I certainly probably didn't have the whole story structure there in place, but I would, like, there were fantasy or there were sci-fi, all this kind of stuff. I feel that I can do that, but when it comes to telling a story within a live video or in a presentation, it's kind of like people say to me, you should tell a story. That's what you should do. And I'm thinking, right. Yeah, it's kind of like jump in the deep end. I think you mentioned that before. So actually kind of finding ways of being creative and having that, I think that structure that you mentioned is so, so important. And, you were talking about what was it? The rider, it was
the stranger rising to
the
town,
stranger. And that could be a situation. It doesn't have to be a person, I think you were saying. So
Correct.
It could be, for example, at the moment, you hate to mention the lockdown. I try and avoid talking about that and the coronavirus. You're listening in the future. Yes, this is 2020. But maybe that is obviously something that's affected most people in the world. And so that could be the stranger. And how do you deal with it? And I mean, what I would love to hear from you, have you got any other kind of ways or examples that we could tell stories that might be helpful to my viewers and listeners?
Yeah, so I think, in a way you can split the word story and then telling. But going back to story, that stranger is so important. And the reason why we call it the stranger rides into town is because actually the heroes and actually all the supporting characters around them, they have no preconceived ideas and knowledge of what that is. And actually part of what they need to do is understand it more and then make the right decisions. So in a way, if you take, for example, another classic, if you take Jaws, for example, people don't understand to begin with what that is. And even when they know that vaguely it's a shark, they don't know which one, and so on and so forth. And that's why they make poor decisions. Well, that's why there's tension between, rivalry between the town leadership and what they need to do. If you think about Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indy's happy to be a lecturer, and a complete stranger from governments come in and completely disrupt the status quo of him essentially taking time out from expeditions and so on. So I think the stranger is very important. But then when it comes to telling, then this is where really your voice and talent comes in and where your imagination comes in, because you have to make decisions now on the visualization. How are you going to translate the story into visual statements? And I'd love your reaction, Ian, about this idea of typically the way in which a filmmaker or documentary filmmaker would think of it is essentially in shots. So we think lead shots. So we think what would be the principal imagery where we're going to follow obviously the main characters, but then we have secondary and tertiary shots where we may establish where we are, what time it is. We may establish obviously emotions by doing some close-ups, and maybe we'll pull back and so on. So there's a whole alphabet, there's a whole language around filmmaking where we vary the shots, but minimum, people like to know where we are, what time it is, and what is the emotions and the mood. And I wonder whether on occasion for live streaming, when you give an account, when you retell the story, and essentially you are a storyteller, you're a narrator, can you then cut away from the lead shot, which is you, to an establishing shot or to some kind of very, very gently edited bit of footage where if you make reference to a location, to an emotion, or if you make reference to a solution, whatever, it is essentially represented visually. So in your case, you were saying that the stranger could be a situation or could be something. Can you bring that as a visual by changing the view, which I know you're doing on your streaming, because that will make you a true visual storyteller when you change the shots?
That is fascinating. I hadn't really thought about that. So today we could have talked about technology, and a lot of people, that's what they want to hear. So if I'd made this like Pascal's 10 top video gear and tools, we'd probably get more people watching because that's what they feel they want. But what I love, what you're talking about here, is you're approaching it not from a tech point of view. You're approaching it from a storytelling point of view, from an emotional point of view, and the tech is used to tell that story. And so my mind is already buzzing with different ideas. I mean, I can change the scenes here. I can go back to you. I can do that. I can do that. But one thing that we could do is we could have like a zooming in shot, or like something where we pan away. We could have different camera angles, and depending on the kind of tool that you use, I'm using Ecamm Live, but you could use the OBS Studio. It allows you to do these different things. To have those different shots. You could have some videos or something, maybe music in the background, to do that. Now, from a tech point of view, that's a bit more tricky with live video, but it's definitely possible. But yeah, I think me and you have to maybe have another chat to think about what ideas we could do. Yeah.
That's what I was asking you, because I can only share with you what we would do when it's not live. And what I would do is two things. I would have obviously a script or script outline. I would have minimum bullet point about the different scenes, but where possible, I would storyboard it. So the other thing that I think people need to get into the habit of doing, I know that there's an immediacy with regard to using laptops, mobile phones, cameras, and so on, but I want you to get into the habit of doodling and sketching. So, you do sketch a rectangle and then fill it in with what you would want to see. And if you were to storyboard, and sometimes we use Post-its, we buy the rectangular one, Ian, as opposed to the square one, it feels more like a screen. But you could actually storyboard, your live session in advance, where at what points, for example, you want to talk about the struggle of somebody trying to find the right piece of software, for example, and you have a 20-second video clips, maybe some stock footage of somebody literally putting their hair out, facing a choice, whatever, to, again, and what those cutaways, we call them cut because you would cut to a different scene at the editing stage, they also reset someone's attention. So you have one of the live audience asking about duration. The reason why you can afford to be as long as you can is because you also allow people to reset their kind of goodwill and attention span to the story. And I think by taking some time them away from just you, because I think that takes the pressure off, by having even a scene. So, a moment ago you asked me kindly, where am I? What can I see? But of course the audience was cheated of what I could see. With preparation, with storyboarding, with a poster saying, what I'm going to do is actually take my mobile phone and record 10, 20 seconds what I can see, and then share that on screen. Or you could do also, in the case of a live session, what we call titling sequence, which I used a lot in TV series, where literally you have an establishing shot of a city and the word Los Angeles, that kind of thing. So you could also do this type of I call them titling sequence, where we remind people about where we are or what we are talking about or what time it is, if you want to be using that. So I think the storyboarding is something that I would be uncomfortable not doing if I was to make any form of visual storytelling. And I do wonder whether it has a role to play to, again, expand your imagination by planning it visually, because you have to sketch it first, as opposed to launching straight into a live session, I wonder.
Wow. Yeah, definitely important stuff there. And approaching it from a storytelling point of view first is the way to go. Absolutely. And we had I had Isabella Russell on the show, as I said, and she was talking about audio branding. So we how you can use music and sound effects. We've already had some sound effects, but you could do this. There was a slight delay there, but you could have sound effects and
Boris
do that
Karloff just coming through that.
Yeah, that kind of thing. So what you were saying earlier, I think that we're talking about the stranger, and I think the two emotions that I think are so important when it comes to, particularly with live video, I feel, but I think with the storytelling is our empathy, because your audience, if they're watching you if they're listening to you tell the story, you want them to feel empathy. You want them, you're trying to provoke empathy. You're trying to kind of talk about a situation that they empathize with. But then the other thing is belonging. Belonging is a real strong emotion. If they feel they belong, it's almost as if your live videos are almost like a counseling session, that you're articulating how they feel inside, and you're giving them hope. You're making them feel that they're not alone. Would you say, have I got that about right?
Yes, I mean, what you'll find is people who watch movies that is an echo of their current or recent mental state. So that's why people would watch forgive me, a sad movie to actually have a few tears. They watch a comedy, they'll watch action movies and so on and so forth. But I think you're right. I mean, I will repeat my sentence. How are people I can relate to coping with that sudden change in their world? Yeah. And for me, when I look at my work, whether it's to help a business move forward with their brand positioning, or if it's someone that's doing video blogging and so on, we still essentially ask ourselves the question, what do we want the audience to feel? Then we'll work out what they're going to hear and see. And it's back to why I was so nervous about, many years ago, Ian, when I was thinking, I'm going to have a meeting with a managing director of this manufacturing company, and we're going to discuss about how the audience is going to feel when we do this video to promote, what it can do as a business. And it's working. People actually understand it, and I think it's because of also the streaming platform like Netflix and Amazon Prime and Apple TV and so on have allowed people to consume a lot more varied content, not just the blockbusters. And I think they've seen how emotionally charged those TV series that they're so fond of are. I mean, ultimately, that thing to me is probably where we need to look at for good examples. I mean, recently the book series Alex Rider had their own translation to a TV series on Amazon Prime, and I have to tell you, it was outstanding from a visual storytelling point of view. So, if any of our viewers and listeners want to even just study how it's done, translating it from a list of scenes as bullet points and then storyboarding into a visual kind of moving image, I think the new TV series of Alex Rider is a great almost form of homework. Just look at that and pause every so often. You'll see how it's been, the composition, the choice of colors, and so on and so forth. It's really quite inspiring.
Well, that's great. We've been given some homework, so that is what you need to do. I'll be checking up on you next week, or on Thursday, in fact. And it's very, very difficult homework. Watching Netflix, it's we work you hard on this show. So I love all of that, what you've said, and I think I don't think it needs to be overwhelming. I think once you with the storytelling thing, I think at first when you said 7 steps, people might be going, "Oh my goodness, there's a lot there." But I think you explained it really well. It feels doable. But when it comes to the world of live video, where, there's so many distractions around, we keeping the attention of our viewers, and even on podcasts and other forms of content, of formats, how do we tell the story? Or how, is there a hook that we can start our live shows with, or a pre-recorded video, or a podcast that's going to help keep our listeners, our viewers, watching to the end? Is there like a mini story, or is there something that we can learn from the world of film that can get people hooked right from the start?
Yeah, you've got to use what we call the setup. I mean, we, as in, it's a term that is used out there, setup or whatever. And the best way I can give you a reference point is you've got to go back and watch Peter Falk in Columbo. So what you have here is, and it's something that I think we can all look forward to, where you, as the independent live show producer, before the live show, I've crafted a visual story that you play in advance before coming online. So the idea being that you set up what you're going to be exploring for your audience. You set up essentially the subject matter, the topic, the challenge, the problem, the solution that you want to go to by essentially sharing a mini story. So back to that, which is, if people just watch that bit, they kind of get it. And then they're going to stay with you because they want to see what the resolution is all the way, because you've done a good setup. All movies, the first, sometimes it's actually blended. You may remember, Ian, with the opening credits. But if you watch that opening credits sequence, it's the setup. And if the setup doesn't work, then your audience will be less willing to stick around, because in a way, they don't feel as engaged. But also what the setup suggests to your audience is that you worked hard at this live session. It's going to be really worth their while sticking around. There's a lot going on in the first 60, 90 seconds. And what is lovely is, back to your comment about tech and gear, it's become so much easier now to craft this setup. You can have a simple mobile phone app like Quick and the other clips and so on. You can find a plethora now of stock video footage on platforms like Pexels and many others, or you can go out and film your own stuff. And you're going to take great pleasure. And I think that's also where you're going to find your imagination is going to be invited and expanded upon, because ultimately, you're right, the live or the story is for the audience, but nothing's stopping you from doing things just for you. By creating maybe an opening sequence and indeed a closing sequence, almost to kind of do that for you. And you'll find that you'll feel so energized for that live session that they'll stick around. And then make sure that when you deliver the story, have clear segments and use the 7 story. So first, tell me about the stranger. Then tell me about how they've coped, and tell me about why it was so difficult. But what you can do, because you're in the live environment, it's not pre-recorded footage, then I would say open and close each segment with questions. I mean, literally almost kind of ask questions of the audience, but of course you answer them as you find lecturers would do in university, as well as, good interviewers and documentaries and so on.
That's awesome. That's great. Well, we're almost out of time. I just wanted to ask you.
No.
I know it's well, we're going to have to get you back on, and hopefully before the next 12 months. That would be good. Are there any other techniques or considerations that we can learn from filmmaking?
I made some notes, so I hope you don't mind. I'm going to look at them. So yes, I mean, one thing that we do, so we're always looking to be ready for the next project. So what we don't like is to be caught short of ideas or whatever. So one thing that we do is we do what we called a locations list. So you should have at your fingertips available to you 3 types of location, which I know at the moment is tricky, but I'm wondering, Ian, whether the future of live is also to be in different locations. I wait to hear your reaction to that, but we tend to have, we're ready with essentially what we call natural locations. So in my case, I pretty much have some of the best, looking natural locations in the whole of the northeast of England listed, and I know where they are if I want to really surprise people, and no matter the work I'm doing. Then we have what we called man-made historical locations, and then we have man-made current contemporary locations. You have almost 3 lists, and you can have fun. You can use Google Maps, to kind of pin them down, whatever. But as an independent producer, you should never be caught short of ideas and suggestions for the next project. And I wonder whether it's going to be part of how you're going to keep the audience engaged, which is you make the location, which is actually the truth, a character in your storytelling. So I think that's kind of what I would do. The other thing that I would look at is also using the technique of flashbacks. So what I mean by that is, if you are looking to explore a challenge, a topic, and so on. One thing that works superbly well in storytelling is tapping into nostalgia. So we're in luck because with the likes of YouTube and many other platforms, there is now so much content out there that looks back in history. Some of it is public domain, so you could be looking back at, when we first went onto the moon, or the first, attempts to go into, the tomb in Egypt and whatever, but bring some of the history and where we've come from. So you were talking about earlier, Ian, a sense of belonging and the sense of story. People like also a sense of direction. So where we come from, where we're now, and where is this going? So you'd be able to use flashbacks, I think, as a good technique for you. And I think for me, the next thing that I would always do as part of the future is this idea of becoming part of a collective and working with others and supporting each other in your effort as a visual storyteller. Because I think really the one difference I see at the moment when it comes to online compared to offline is that offline we work as part of a team. I mean, most of my projects were done with others. Sometimes it was a very small team again, and there was just 2 or 3, but at least it was 2 or 3. I think with regard to live, I would like to suggest to you and to many others that the solo kind of endeavors have been part of your formative years, but where you're going to completely kind of go to the next level of experience for yourself and for your audience is when you're part of a collective. And if you think about filmmakers, indie filmmakers, whether they are in the UK, in America, in Australia, whatever, very often there's a community, there's a hub. They know of each other, they support each other, they work with each other, they have kind of get together around a pizza and a beer with each other. And they share and they care for each other. And I think I could be wrong, but that's something we can all look forward to, where the live streamers start to really be organized as a community. And literally you may end up being the sound guy on someone else's stream, but then they support you by being the kind of pre-producer girl or guy by helping you with locations. And I think it's going to be so magical.
I totally agree with you. And I think if ever we need that collaboration and that community within people within a particular niche, it's now more than ever. And I couldn't agree with you more. Wow. Well, there's so much. We could almost like start a whole new podcast episode now, and there's so much from what you just gave there, but we are out of time. And it's always nice it's always good, I think, to leave people wanting more. Wouldn't you agree, Pascal?
That's true.
So
a sequel.
There we go. Yes. The Confident Live Marketing Show Mark II. So how can people find out more about you, to how they can stalk you in a nice way? I'm sure you're across all the socials and you have a website and all that kind of stuff. How can people find out more about you and follow you?
Yeah, so I'm very lucky that with a name like mine, I'm easily found on the internet. So if you literally put Pascal Fintoni on Google, you'll find all the different platforms. And yes, get in touch. I mean, obviously, I'd love to get people's reaction and views on what you and I discussed today. I'm always on the lookout for guests for my own kind of video podcasting. So again, if you have an interesting approach and mindset to the world of content creation, it'd be lovely to hear from you, whether you are a newbie all the way to obviously an expert, because I think we can all learn from each other no matter where we are in our journey as a visual storyteller.
Well, thank you so much. It's been great to have you on the show. And I can't wait for this to be turned into the blog. So all the show notes for this will be at iag.me/82. And just to let you know, thank you so much for watching or for listening to the podcast. We're live every Tuesday and Thursday on Facebook, YouTube, and the rest of them. You can get notified at confident./subscribe. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. I don't always ask for this. I need to do this more often, but I would love it if you do listen to the podcast, leave a review, or just reach out to me and let me know, because sometimes podcasting can be a bit of a lonely business. Wouldn't you agree, Pascal? It can be a bit of a lonely business, this world that we live in. Fabulous.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Pascal. It's been great to have you on the show. But until next time, I encourage you to level up your impact, authority, and profits through the power of Confident Live Video. See you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Confident Live Marketing Podcast with Ian Anderson Gray. Be sure to join the community at iag.me, where you can continue to level up your impact, authority, and profits through the power of live video. And until next time, toodaloo.